Well, good morning, everybody. It's 10 a.m. and welcome to our program for today. Just a couple of the quick housekeeping items that we always open our events with. Just reminders, we've got everybody muted. If by any stroke of the imagination you get through the Zoom system and you see your cell phone screen or hear your cell phone screen, please hit that mute button, because only two people who should be seen and heard today are our esteemed guest and myself. There is a chat button, as you'll see at the bottom of your screen. This may be one of these days where you have questions. We encourage them. Just pop the question in there. I'll try to keep one eye on what's going on down there, and I'll pose those questions to our guest as we proceed. And then finally, the inevitable question that I get: are you recording? Yes, we are recording the program. Later on this afternoon, we will send you a link. We take the recording from Zoom, we load it to YouTube, and we'll send you a YouTube link at close of business this afternoon. So be on the lookout if you're looking for that. Why today's program? Today we present the fourth in our connoisseurship series, and the subject is, of course, the appreciation of art. And we're delighted to get into sort of a fascinating discussion on the subject of the appreciation of art. And as always, our intent is to better equip you, the luxury marketers, with a fundamental understanding of what connoisseurship really means, and how you can then apply that to your marketing, etc. So that's the purpose. Today we converse with Kamal Zargar, who represents Crozier Fine Arts, and we're going to talk to Kamal about the fascinating and in many instances intimidating world of art appreciation. So, Kamal, welcome to our connoisseurship series. We're absolutely delighted to have you today.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me.
Just before we get into connoisseurship and art, give me just the headlines, if you would, please, on Crozier Fine Arts, so we know where you come from and what you do.
Yeah. So Crozier Fine Arts is a company that I joined about a year and a half ago, less than 2 years, after previously working in sort of the commercial side of the art world with fairs such as like Frieze Art Fair, and then before that, in large museums, such as the National Gallery and Smithsonian. But the Crozier is sort of the behind the scenes part of the art world. We are arguably sort of the largest logistics firm for the art world. We're all over the US, up and down the Eastern Seaboard, in LA, where I'm located. We recently acquired a company just a few weeks ago in Hong Kong, so we're expanding in Asia. We're big in London, we're big in Switzerland, we're in Paris recently. But basically, we handle all aspects of the movement, the installation, de-installation, packing, storage, all logistical aspects of moving art, setting up exhibitions. And basically what we like to say is, if we've done our job right, you have never noticed us. You would never known that we were there. So we make sure everything arrives on time, it's set up, it's secure, it's safe, so that, if it's a gallery, they can do their business. If it's a museum, they can open on time. But we work with a lot of clients globally, as we expand our global footprint.
So you're dealing with museums, you're dealing with galleries, and you're dealing with the art connoisseur as well. Yes.
Yeah, everybody and anybody. I work personally a lot with sort of higher end private collectors, as well as sort of museums that are mounting sort of significant retrospective exhibitions, having sort of come from that sort of big museum world. But we also work with interior designers, an area that I know well, who work with real estate folks. But we also move objects that sort of don't qualify or classify easily as fine art. I've moved costumes. I've worked a lot with the entertainment business here in LA, So anything of a value and sort of needs that white glove service, and certainly, under the umbrella of connoisseurs, they want that white glove service. That's really what we provide.
Okay, so the reason I wanted you to have this I wanted to have this conversation with you today was that I knew you brought that 360 perspective, which is what, quite frankly, we're looking for. Let's start at 30,000 feet and we'll get down to the granular stuff pretty quickly, as we normally do. Based on your experience, how are you defining connoisseurship? It's a very, very nebulous term, but how do you see it? And to that point, how do you interpret or judge the sort of the fundamentals of a connoisseur, or what's the profile of a connoisseur from your perspective?
It certainly requires a specialization, generally in sort of a niche field, right? And I would sort of classify art as a niche field. But specifically within the art world, it not only requires sort of intense study of the art world and the art business, because it is, very prolific business, but because so much is changing in the art world with, new artists coming into play, or coming to the market, or, new research being conducted on older artists, deceased artists. If you kind of want to be a connoisseur or kind of classify yourself as a connoisseur, it requires sort of continuous study, deep study. So you need to be constantly reading about new artists, going to exhibitions and shows, and biennales and art fairs, to see what is sort of new and exciting. But also you need to be sort of, doing the work, doing the reading of what's been sort of reevaluated from the past, from art history. So it's not just enough to kind of spend X amount of years, 10,000 hours, however you want to sort of classify it, and then sort of call yourself a connoisseur. You do need to sort of continuously be studying the field, again, because the art world is always sort of changing, which is partly why it's so interesting. In my opinion, it's sort of a lifelong pursuit, and something that I basically started, my first day of university at 18 years old, and that I'll sort of continue on for the rest of my life.
Come on, but take it down to the personality level if you can. Is there a profile of an art connoisseur? Do you find there are certain givens? Certain characteristics that define that person?
I think
are they well educated? Are they
are they
wealthy?
I think education is a certain is 100% a major impact, or a major attribute, rather. Most people that work in the art world and sort of have had long-term successful careers, generally have graduate degrees. And again, it doesn't stop there. It's a continuous study. In terms of sort of social status, yes, art is a sort of a luxury field, right? Certainly at the collector level, but that's not a requirement to qualify as a connoisseur, right? I think it certainly qualifies to be a player in the market, in the art market, but curators, for example, at major museums, I certainly would classify as connoisseurs. That doesn't necessarily mean that they have to come from a certain pedigree or a certain background. So I think education is 100% a requirement. Social status and wealth, less so, but it's certainly not uncommon to sort of come from that background.
When you talk to them, when you converse with them, when you communicate with them, what's the style? How do you talk to a connoisseur? Well, let's be. How do you talk to an art connoisseur so that the communication is set up and is established? What's the hot button for them that will enable them to respond to you? What's the listening on your part?
Well, I think you wouldn't want to use too much jargon. I think those that are sort of most knowledgeable about the art world and the art market are able to kind of communicate to peers and to connoisseurs and whatnot, or to clients. Sort of complex issues related to, whether it's an artwork or, the art business, in sort of kind of clear, succinct language that doesn't use too much jargon. And I think in any niche industry or field, you do have a lot of sort of jargon use, and that always sort of shows up to those that are sort of non-connoisseurs, right? So it's really, I think, hard to kind of fake your knowledge of the art world and the art business. Those that are sort of maybe new to it have a sort of a similar vocabulary, if you will, or way of speaking. But when you're sort of speaking to, senior museum curator or sort of a senior advisor that works with big clients, you just sort of sync up quite nicely if you've both been in the world for a long time. You've been in different aspects of the world, and the nonprofit side, which would be the museum world, the commercial side, the gallery, the art fairs, and even sort of my side, my new side, which is more sort of the behind the scenes.
But from an emotional intelligence point of view and an emotional quotient, what's the style? When do you know that you're connecting? Because you fascinates me. You're dealing with all these facets of the art world. How do you connect?
I mean, you connect, I think, through genuine interest and passion for art. Again, I think that's sort of hard to fake. And when someone is kind of doing it, it's very apparent for those that are, for those of us that are sort of heavily invested in this business.
Can you give me an example of where that's happened to you recently, or in the recent past?
Yeah, I mean, it generally shows up at kind of the social events. Where it's perfectly good, and we certainly want as many people to come to say a gallery opening or a party, and you kind of want to bring as many people into this world as possible. But it's you could kind of quickly find your counterpart fairly easy as you're sort of working the room, right? You can sort of you kind of sync up emotionally when you sort of found a fellow connoisseur or a fellow peer that's been in this business for a long time.
It's like art dating.
Yeah, and they, again, the way they speak will easily and quickly show you how much they know about this business and how it kind of moves and plays. But anybody that sort of comes in new might use sort of the wrong language, or might just sort of throw in some sort of common or jargon words without sort of the emotional aspects behind it to sort of back it up and support it. I think that is kind of a tell, if you will.
Put the commercial side aside for a moment. I'm talking about the galleries and the museums, etc. Let's just deal with the collector for just a moment.
Yeah.
For the collectors, how do they acquire connoisseurship? Is it taught? Is it acquired osmotically? What is the process?
Well, the typical connoisseur in the art world has always sort of generally been, the sort of senior level museum curators, senior specialists at Christie's and Sotheby's, even sort of a handful of sort of advisors, although that can be a mixed bag. But when it comes to collectors, they can be a mixed bag as well. Some folks collect just enough to sort of fit their wall, but the ones that are sort of committed to the arts I would sort of classify as collectors / patrons, right? So they're there to sort of support the artists throughout their career. They're often very closely tied to that artist's gallery. They're sort of continuously supporting that artist by buying their art, or perhaps loaning their artworks to a museum, which will kind of help increase the stock and value of that artist. But it's a connoisseur collector is a sort of a lifelong collector, not someone who's just trying to buy a few key names just because they have sort of the financial means and they kind of put them up on their walls as sort of trophies. It's a lifelong pursuit of patronage. That, and then when
So they're totally immersed. They're
you're
totally
totally
immersed,
immersed, yeah, and
either in the art world or with that specific artist.
yeah, and obviously, most collectors collect several artists, and they sort of they follow their career, they support them. They'll get involved at their local museums, perhaps at the board level. And once you sort of do that, then you kind of get really close to getting the typical connoisseurs, which are sort of the senior curators at museums. And that's a big part of, the reason why a collector would join the board, was to sort of have that access to that level of expertise.
You threw out an interesting comment a moment ago about, you said those who fill the wall. I mean, I know what that means, but just put a few more pounds of meat around those bones.
Yeah,
These are why are they buying? Well, how's that work?
Yeah, when I say sort of fill the wall, they're just trying to sort of fill up the empty walls that are in their house, right? So that could be, depending on how big their house is, that could be, 10 pieces, that could be 30, 40, 50 pieces.
For their own edification, or to show other people, or both, or how, or what?
A little bit of both, for sure. The art world is certainly kind of seen as a club, and there's certain ways to sort of get into that club. If you're a professional, it's your sort of life and career. But if you're a collector, especially a new collector, you kind of want to be associated with that world. The way you do is you get some key pieces by some key artists, and that kind of will classify you as a collector. But if you just sort of stop at those first 20 pieces and your wall is filled, I wouldn't really sort of classify that into heading towards the level of sort of patronage / connoisseurship. The part of the reason that Crozier exists is because there are collectors that have collections that are far beyond what's available to be put into their house, right? Again, it's because it's a lifelong pursuit. They want to support the artist, right? It's very much about that. And they're going to have to put certain things into storage. So yeah, I think it's partly just to kind of show off that you are connected and knowledgeable about the arts and the creative spaces. And if you're really getting sort of key names, but at a limited number, it sort of it gets into the realm of like just putting a trophy on your mantle.
Let me just wrap up this segment by asking the question one more time, just to make sure the notion of connoisseurship, in your experience, are the majority of the connoisseurs that you interface with, are they learned, and are they taught on the subject, or have they acquired that connoisseurship via appreciation over time, or give me the headline?
It's a combination of both. I think you need, just some deep education, right, at a graduate level, where you sort of took a deep dive in some area of art history. And once you sort of, leave your graduate education and sort of get into the art world, you really kind of attain that connoisseur level by being heavily connected. This is a business that is very relationship driven. It's important to have relationships in the gallery world, in the museum world, in the auction world, in the sort of logistics world, just so you have a fully 360 perspective on the business. But again, you really sort of need to get out there and sort of do the work and do the study. You need to get out and sort of see shows. You need to get out to art fairs, to biennial events. Because tomorrow I'm leaving for Venice, Italy, to catch the tail end of the Venice Biennale, which is arguably the most important art event globally that happens every 2 years. And I think if you are sort of to classify yourself as a serious collector, or a connoisseur, you are going to make a stop at that event at some point.
Interesting question. Within the United States, forget the rest of the world globally, but within the United States, if there were 3 art exhibits that one had to attend, they would be what?
Well, certainly major exhibitions, major retrospective exhibitions that will travel. And
Something that you'd see at the Met.
Yeah. So it'll generally sort of, they'll have a couple stops along the way. For example, they'll stop first. It'll start at the Met in New York. Maybe we'll travel down to the National Gallery. Maybe a stop in Texas or another major museum, and then a West Coast location. So anything like that is sort of a must see.
A recent example.
A recent example, one artist, and this is a few years ago, but one artist that I sort of really love and I think is fantastic, and is very strong in the market, is someone like Kerry James Marshall. This was a few years ago. He's a major African American artist. It started at the Met. I believe it was shown here at Los Angeles at MoCA LA. Major significant artist. And he's one of those artists that I would sort of classify as a connoisseur, because his work, his paintings are such deep study of art history. He's so very knowledgeable that you learn so much about the art world or the art history just through his own paintings. His name was Kerry James Marshall.
Okay.
So that's one example on sort of the museum side.
And give me a couple of other globally, not globally, nationally, major events that one would attend.
Yeah. So that's sort of the museum side, and so that's the non-commercial side, right? The commercial side would certainly be the art fairs, which I sort of know intimately, having sort of worked in that field for about 5 years. And we just wrapped up Armory Week in New York last week. That is a significant one. But my sort of former company that I work with, Frieze Art Fair, is certainly one of the biggest. That happens in New York and LA. It happens in New York in May, and then in LA in February. And then there's of course also Art Basel Miami, which is a behemoth, right. And that happens in December, and that is also a must attend.
All right, Kamal, I'm going to move around here because you're throwing out stuff that sort of got me going. Define art, if you would. It's obviously traditional paintings, it's sculpture, it's photography.
Yeah.
Is it vintage posters, for instance?
It can certainly be so. Yeah.
How broad?
I keep the definition broad. I mean, if it's anything that that was done by someone who, again, so similar to a connoisseur, had really sort of honed their craft over a long period of time through, education, through just working in studio, in whatever material I think would sort of classify as art. For me personally, it can't just have sort of aesthetic value. It needs to have sort of strong conceptual value too. Meaning, you need to be able to kind of read into it more than just sort of what's just on there on the canvas.
Is that Karl Lagerfeld? Is that Edith Head? Is that Jackie Kennedy's designer, couture designer?
Yeah, I mean, sort of certainly fashion, I think, qualifies as sort of high-end art.
It's in there.
Yeah, and I work with sort of high-end fashion pieces and costumes. So I think it's something that was produced by someone who really sort of honed and developed their craft. But then, if we're talking again like painting and sculpture, sort of more typical mediums, for me personally, there needs to be, and I think for anybody that's serious about this business and this world and serious collectors, there needs to be something that sort of beyond the aesthetic, right? It needs to be something that's sort of conceptually interesting. That's why I sort of mentioned Kerry James Marshall, because his paintings are so rich and deep because he's such a student of art history. And you can sort of look at them and read into them for a long time over and over again, and sort of discover new things.
Kamal, the question I always ask, and it's I think it's relevant. To what extent do you separate art connoisseurship, but I guess art connoisseurship, from the sort of the encore arts stuff, the sort of the voguish stuff that's happening today? Where do you draw the line?
Yeah, I always try to keep my line dotted, right, or blurry. I don't try to, me personally, classify what is art or what is good art, what is bad art. Anytime I'm sort of speaking to any type of client, the conversation around sort of the judgment, the critique of art is always about, is generally about, which art is sort of more valuable, right, or has value now, or might have value later on. I try to stay away from good and bad, because that kind of gets into kind of what I think you're alluding to, what's in vogue, what's hot right now. Because again, kind of what I was speaking about earlier, where you need to kind of be continually studying and doing research in this field, is because people will see artwork that's being done today differently in about 20 years.
But examples, I mean, let me throw some out. Charles Schultz, Peanuts.
Yeah.
Peter Max.
Yeah.
Whose stuff is splattered everywhere.
Yeah.
Leroy Neiman. Walt Disney sells from Fantasia. Where is the dividing line, if there is a dividing line?
Yeah, I mean, like, someone like you said, Charles Schultz, or sort of the comics world, right? From a market perspective, say some original drawings, those will sell very high, right? Now, would you sort of classify them as sort of typical fine art? Some people would say yes, some people would say no.
What do you say?
I would say it's a little bit of both. I know it's not a hard yes or no, but I mean, I've gone to exhibitions, galleries of drawings of sort of say Walt Disney, or some other sort of comic book artists, and they're fascinating, right? They're not they're the sort of inspiration for the comic book that sold 1 million copies or what have you, but these are the original drawings. And yeah, I mean, these are genuine artists, and there's certainly a collecting community that's very specific and niche about that. And those numbers, those market numbers have gone up. So if it's if it's like an original drawing, yes, I would classify that as fine art.
Okay.
But when it's sort of like the first edition copy of Superman, so and so, that might sell for a very high number, but it was one of X amount that was produced, and they're all kind of lost now. So its values really come from the rarity of it, but it was originally produced for mass reproduction. I might not classify that as fine art, but it's still certainly of major value.
I mean, in fact, there is a blurring between commerce and art appreciation. I mean, it's everything I read about the art world from a commercial point of view. It's money drives the conversation.
100%.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, the art market has been strong for a long time. There was a little bit of a slowdown during COVID, but it's come back quite strong. I think it's around 65. I mean, these are estimates because there's no real art index. It's really hard to measure. But the rough estimate is around 65 billion annually.
In the US or globally?
Globally. US being the leading market, followed by the UK, followed by Asia, which in Asia is is the biggest growing market for sure. But prices are continuously keep going up. Whether it's on the primary market level with buying directly from galleries, or on the secondary market level, which is, of course, the auction world.
Just stay with money for just a moment. Allow me to be tawdry and ask this question. Is art going to be a stable, appreciable asset for the foreseeable and long-term future, particularly in this day and age where we're seeing such volatility in the traditional asset classes? Is art a good investment, or is there a bubble in art that will burst at some inevitable point in time? And also talk about NFTs in that conversation if you can.
Yeah. So let me answer the bubble question. I don't think there's a major bubble by any means. I think the art market will go as the way sort of the general sort of broader markets go, right? And as wealth grows, the value or the prices of art will kind of go up with it. And we've sort of seen, the sort of the top tier increase their wealth over the last couple of years. Right?
But it's exponential, Kamal. You don't even get surprised now when you see a piece sold at Sotheby's for 400 million.
Right.
I mean, when does that stop?
Right. I mean, everyone's kind of wondering what's going to be the first $1 billion artwork sold.
Precisely.
Right? Yeah.
What is going to be the first $1 billion sale?
And there's plenty of people that could make that purchase, right? Or a group of people. But your first question, or the first part of your question there about, art as an investment.
Is it safe? Is it a good investment?
The general answer is no, because there's so much art out there, so much art being created, that only sort of the top slim tier are sort of guaranteed to sort of hold their value or increase their value. Especially now because there's a lot of speculation that's happening in the art market where, you got big collectors sort of buying young artists that are just a couple of years out of the, and out of an NFA program. And they're having their first solo show at a gallery in LA or New York or London. And their pieces are $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. They'll all get sort of scooped up because those might increase quickly within the next year or two to $100,000 if they try to sort of flip it at auction. Now, that doesn't mean it's a good investment. That just might be a sort of a good short-term play. And that type of situation is generally not good for the business. It's not good for the artist. It really kind of only benefits the collector that sort of swooped in and got in early. But it's not a sort of sustainable practice. I mean, I think, if you're buying art, you should first and foremost have a genuine interest in it. Because if you buy something thinking that you're going to sort of sell it for, 3x, 4x, a year or two down the road, that might not be the case, and you're sort of stuck with the piece, so you better enjoy it.
All right.
But at the same point, I think it is wise to purchase art with both things in mind, right? Buy something that you have a genuine interest in,
that you would enjoy.
Yeah, that you truly enjoy, but it doesn't hurt to ask questions about, with the gallerist or directly with the artist. Where do you see this artist's career going? What museum shows do they have coming up? What new exhibitions at the gallery do they have coming up? Are they co-represented with another gallery? That'll kind of tell you about sort of the long-term prospects of this artist, which will kind of lead into the sort of long-term value of the artwork that you purchase. So you can do both at the same time, but it sort of needs to begin with that genuine interest in the artist and the artwork.
All right, we've got about 20 minutes left here, and I've got so much more to ask you, so I'm going to move quickly. NFTs, did you have a headline on that?
Yeah, I mean, so NFTs, it kind of, my answer to that is kind of what I was alluding to earlier about sort of speculation in the art market right now. It's so sort of rampant. I mean, I would always, I don't discount any kind of new medium or any kind of new kind of movement, even though it's still so fresh and new. My only kind of worry about it is how dramatically the prices have gone up. That is something of a red flag.
So what are you saying to me? Be careful.
Be careful,
Don't write it off completely, but be careful.
Yeah, be careful because again, I think there's a lot of speculation happening in that market, and you know that's a very volatile space. I mean, and it's so fresh and so new. You don't know what it's going to be like in a couple of years from now.
Right. I want to ask one final question. I want to get into some specifics here. Would you handle an exhibition of the work of Thomas Kincaid?
Yes. I don't really sort of discount any artist per se. If there's a market for it, or if there's if it's a non-selling exhibition, if the organization thinks that visitors going to show up, yeah, we will work with anybody and everybody.
It qualifies as art, does it not?
Yeah, I mean, it's not. Again, I have my taste, and I like what I like, and I think what's interesting. More importantly, I think I know what I think is valuable now and what might be valuable later on. And that's partly an attribute of being a connoisseur. I think is kind of seeing in the future a little bit what is of value, not just financial value, but cultural value. And I have my thoughts on Thomas Kincaid, but there are other folks that have the opposite of that and want to see that that type of artwork and want to purchase that type of artwork. So it's not really my position to just prevent that unless I'm sort of in a direct advisory position for a collector.
In all of your years in the business, you've been exposed to a lot of art connoisseurs, and you've been able to sum them up. And I forewarned you about this. Is there a person out there who was either a collector or a gallerist or whatever the case may be, who you could really hold as an exemplar, where you could say, this is a person I admire in terms of their connoisseurship of art, the way they approach it, the way they absorb it, the way they consume it? Just, is there the prototypical perfect art connoisseur? Name the person by name or not, I don't care, but I'm looking for that person.
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep sort of specific names out of it. But working at a sort of very large institution, very sort of renowned and respected institution like the National Gallery, I worked with curators on sort of helping them with acquisitions of art, from collectors and whatnot. And those folks, if you're working as a curator at a place like the Met, a National Gallery in London or DC, you certainly qualify as a connoisseur. They're just so dedicated to that specific field, whether it's old master paintings, contemporary art, modern art, what have you. They're so just specialized and dedicated to that study. It really kind of comes through, and that's really kind of where you will find them. And again, that's why part of the reason why major collectors will join, acquisition committees or museum boards to get access to those types of folks, to those types of typical connoisseurs. Another category would be, again, this can be a really kind of mixed bag of folks, but I've worked with a few sort of art advisors, right, which work directly with collectors or an artist foundation or an estate, advising on acquisitions, deaccessions, etc. They too are sort of can be very deeply knowledgeable and sort of deeply dedicated to this field. Although you can really kind of find a mixed bag in that area. So I would stress caution there. But certainly, with certain museum curators that I've worked with, I think those are sort of the prototypical connoisseurs.
What about from the collective viewpoint? Anybody that you can profile without mentioning names?
Yeah, I have do continue to work with some major collectors in New York and London that I think would classify as connoisseurs.
Because
for me, probably the biggest aspect is the same way that sort of a curator sort of dedicates their their energy, their brain to impressionism, what have you, a specific field. A really great collector will have some sense of curation. All right, so they're dedicated to collecting female artists, right, or artists of color, or what have you, something that's probably that they're personally connected to, so that their collection is very kind of cohesive and harmonious. And those are the collections that when I was working in museums, we were sort of trying to go after, right, because they were just so of quality, not necessarily quantity. They were so focused, they were so thoughtfully put together, generally with the help of a thoughtful advisor. And I would certainly classify those type of collectors as connoisseurs and folks that I generally like working with.
Kamal, where art appreciation bleeds into the outside world, into the non-art world, does there tend to be a flow pattern? I mean, obviously there's a flow between art appreciation and great interior design. You opened your comments today with that. There are some great interior designers in the Bay Area who have just a fundamental passion for art. Are there other fields where art appreciation tends to bleed first into?
I would certainly put architecture in there too.
Architecture.
Where you have architects designing homes, keeping in mind that art will be displayed in this home, right? Good art, fine art, and it needs the appropriate lighting, maybe limited lighting for safety and conservation issues. But I think a really great architect should consider, example, they're designing a new home for a client. As I understand, they would have a conversation about their needs and wants, and I would like to think that art would be certainly one of the considerations. And I know it is because I know architects that do such a thing and think such a way. So certainly architecture, certainly interior design, just the broader design world. There used to be a more of a rigid line between the design world and the art world, but that too is becoming blurred, which I think is generally positive. But I think I would also sort of maybe put up the entertainment world, having sort of recently moved to LA, where you have actors that are stepping into the art world and being artists and making paintings, and some of it's pretty good, but you have much more of an alignment with collectors from the entertainment world coming into the fine art world in, say, the last couple of years, partly because the LA art market has been on the growth trajectory for the last 10, 15 years. Yeah. Especially in the last couple of years, when Frieze Art Fair, again, my former company that I worked with, launched a major event here in LA that happens every February. And you attend it and you'll see many folks from the entertainment world. I currently have a lot of clients from the entertainment world, whether they're actors and actresses or agents and whatnot.
We're at the wrap-up phase here. We've got 15 minutes. I've got a number of questions I want to ask, so let's just go through them quickly. Regions of the world where art appreciation tends to be at the forefront. Obviously, the United States, and within the U.S., what are we talking? The traditional bi-coastal split: Miami, New York, perhaps Boston, and then L.A., San Francisco.
New York is certainly still sort of the center for the art world, but LA is not far behind.
Where else?
But beyond those two cities, I would put Chicago up there. There has been an increase of great galleries there. There has been some great, continues to be some major museums. Before LA, I was in the Bay Area. San Francisco has several amazing museums, and it's seeing a growing collector class. Texas is extremely strong. There's some major collectors there. It's not, there's a handful of galleries there, but there's some major museums there that have with some amazing collections. And so, and there's a few cities in the Midwest. Again, they don't have sort of the gallery world that New York, LA, SF have, but they have some major museums there, and that are supported by some strong collectors. I'm thinking cities like Minneapolis, Kansas City, the Minneapolis Institute of Art, the Walker Art Center, Nelson Atkins. Those are major museums that have some major long collecting families that support them. Cleveland is very big. So it's not just limited to the coast. The Midwest is quite strong, as well as sort of, upper Midwest, Chicago, and then heading down towards Texas.
There was a question there. The name of the exhibition you just spoke about in LA again. The recurring.
I think Frieze Art Fair is what I was alluding to. I think, yeah, that happens every February.
Globally, then, outside of the US, just give me the major centers. Obviously, London.
Yeah, London is obviously top of mind. A lot of people thought things were going to kind of shift back towards Paris during around the time of Brexit, but and Paris has sort of seen an uptick. Art Basel is launching a new fair there, which is very exciting. Some new galleries have opened up shop there, which is very exciting. It's always been strong, and it increases strength a little bit, but that doesn't mean London took a major hit because of Brexit. Berlin is very strong, major galleries there, and just all of Germany has great museums.
What about Asia?
So Asia is, again, I think I mentioned it earlier, is probably the strongest growing market. It used to be kind of centered around Hong Kong, which is still very strong, but so the political situation there has kind of made things a little bit more challenging. But there are shifts towards other cities. Frieze just concluded their first edition of Frieze Seoul, so they just launched an art fair in Seoul, Korea. Many galleries are opening up new spaces in Seoul. There's a strong local Korean art collecting community there. So I would definitely put that the top of mind, but also places like Singapore have some serious collectors as well.
Okay. Quick question on the younger demographic. Let's keep away from Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z. Do you see any rumblings of interest on the part of a younger demographic? And I want to tie that back specifically to the Bay Area, to the tech community. Are the tech guys coming in, the tech girls coming in to buy art? And if they are, why are they doing it? Do they think it's buying them respectability, or are they buying it out of genuine appreciation? We know they've got the money.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that I was quite keenly interested in, having moved from New York to the Bay Area and then eventually down to LA, where I currently am. But I was a couple of years in the Bay Area looking to sort of tap into this world and tap into this market. I mean, first and foremost, yes, there is a sort of quite a pretty decent collecting community that comes from the tech world. It might not be as strong as I had hoped, or we as an industry had hoped, given how much wealth there is there. And they don't, and there are some really great collectors, serious collectors, long-term collectors that come from the tech world. But sometimes, I would run into folks that, again, kind of what I was alluding to earlier, they kind of just buy for the wall. They buy just sort of enough that meets their kind of immediate needs. They might not be in it for the long term. I mean, the really great serious collectors always tell me the same thing, and that is that collecting art is addictive. I found that less to be looking at collectors from the tech community. But again,
what about the younger demographic?
Yeah,
are they showing interest?
Yeah, of course, 100%. Yeah, they do. but they also sort of challenge the as you are sort of challenging all types of institutions and industries, because this is a sort of an old world industry, and it's slow to change, and sometimes they don't rationalize why it costs 100,000, million, 10 million, $100 million for a painting, and I can certainly appreciate why, and they don't want to put their resources towards that. But yeah, I think there's certainly engagement from the younger generations, but it takes time. I think it's similar to what the tech community, they didn't necessarily buy when they had a windfall of cash, and they because of an IPO and what have you, they kind of waited a little longer. They had kids, they had a home, they were a bit more settled. Then they kind of got more interested in collecting art. So there's certainly sort of a young community that is involved in there, but they do kind of come into it generally a bit later.
The just a marketing question. It strikes me that the art world operates on a 1940s marketing technology, right?
Yeah.
It's catalogs, it's auctions, it's catalogs and it's auctions, and and it's a gallery, and it's a museum. To what extent is digital marketing, is the new world of social media, the new world of communication, impacting the world of art appreciation, or not, which is probably more appropriate?
Yeah. No, I mean, there's digital platforms like Instagram are huge for the art business in the art world, right? I know, a lot of museums don't put as much effort towards that. The galleries will put a lot more effort towards that. There are always ones that are a bit more entrepreneurial, they're kind of a bit more scrappy, trying new things. Whereas, the museums are the ones that are kind of like what you said, are operating in the sort of 1940s world. But they're changing as well, getting on things like TikTok and whatnot.
They are doing that.
Yeah, or some of them are sort of selling their own NFTs. I know the Louvre, or I think at the Uffizi in Florence, is selling NFTs of major old master paintings to raise funds, because basically all museums are always scrambling to raise money in any way they can. But they are slower to evolve and to adapt. But Instagram is probably the platform for the art world and the art industry and the art market. Everybody and anyone is sort of on it. But their catalogs are still being produced. I think that's a good thing. That's part of the role of museums, and it alludes to sort of connoisseurship. There needs to be good publications produced on these artists, on these major exhibitions, good research that will sort of allow the sort of the in-depth knowledge that is needed to become a connoisseur. You can't have that without the research and the curators producing those publications.
I've got 5 minutes here, Kamal, and I've got 3 or 4 more quick questions. Stay with auctions quickly.
Yeah.
If I wanted to go to a Sotheby's auction, I obviously can't afford it, but if I wanted to go, can I go?
Yeah, well, I mean, they have all types of auctions. So you might not be able to get to sort of the evening sale in the springtime where, the low end price is $1 million, but there's day sales. And there's often very good art there. Obviously at a much lower price. That is open to a lot more folks. And, especially during COVID, they had to transition to doing all their sales online.
Right.
And that just kind of opened the floodgates for folks, right?
So I can come into an auction online.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that, like, the reports coming out how, a certain high percentage of the people that were bidding on pieces at auctions during COVID were all new or unknown to the auction house, and a big chunk of them were coming from Asia.
All right. Stay with the question. If I was to select one auction that I wanted to attend online, what would it be?
Oh, well, I mean,
to give me the flavor.
to give you the flavor, I mean, and they stream these now. So even if you're not sort of a registered bidder, but the Sotheby's and Christie's, hold their big sales in the springtime, and so during around sort of May or in the fall around October, in London. So the New York sales will happen in springtime. The London sales will happen in the fall around October.
But give me one that I should log into. What would you advise?
It would be the evening sale at either Christie's or Sotheby's in October.
All
The
right.
evening modern and contemporary sales.
I need some advice from you, Kamal. We've got 3 minutes here. Help me hone my appreciation of art. Right? Help me learn.
Yeah.
Where do I go? Do
Yeah.
I go to the media? Do I follow a certain person? Is there an Instagram site that I should be following? Is there an organization should I go to the museum every week? Just give me the basics.
Yeah. First and foremost, you need to get out physically. You need to get out and see the artworks in person. Digital has its value, but I'm sort of old school in that you need to get out and see these pieces in person. That means going around to galleries every week. Gallery shows last about a month, so there's constant rotation.
How often are you out, by the way? How often are you out to exhibits, exhibitions?
Almost every week or every other week. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, you need to just get a certain amount of eye mileage. You just need to constantly be seeing exhibitions, whether they're at galleries. Again, those galleries those are commercial, right? They're selling exhibitions, or museums, right? You're in the Bay Area, you have SF MoMA, you have De Young, you have many others.
Stop there. If I'm coming in, if it's an entry level strategy, obviously I want to follow the artist of my liking.
Yeah.
How do I do that? How do I determine who I like and therefore I want to grow an attachment to? Because there's so much out there.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds kind of romantic, but there's some, you walk into a gallery and the artwork there just might not.
The heartbeats.
Yeah, it just does no sort of bodily reaction, but you walk into another gallery and it just sort of clicks with you. And if it does, I'd always sort of recommend, talk to the dealers, talk to the gallery attendants, ask them questions. They generally have some literature that you can read into. But it should always sort of begin with, sort of a basic emotional response. And then sort of some further reading to sort of increase that, most likely. Is
there a specific blog, website, social media site that you follow? The first thing in the morning or by the end of the day, you're at that location to see what happened?
Yeah, I mean, there's just sort of trade publications that they kind of skew more on the market side, like the art newspaper or ArtNet, Art News. Those are sort of the classics. But more on the critical side, so Frieze is started as a magazine. Now it's an art fair, amongst other things. It's still sort of very strong, very well respected publication for criticism, as well as Art Forum. Those are sort of the top two magazines. Most of the other sort of art magazines have kind of fluttered away. But I mean, I'd also sort of highlight the New Yorker and the New York Times often do these really long form, great artist profiles. We're talking like 10,000 words plus that are published maybe once or twice a year on sort of key artists of the moment. So it's a good deep dive study of an artist that is kind of particular.
Got it.
Now
you're heading to Venice tomorrow.
Yeah.
Your heart is beating about what outside of going to Venice. I envy you. But when you go to the Biennale, what are you looking for? What are you excited to see specifically?
I mean, there's always a sort of a key few artists. And those that don't sort of know the Venice Biennale, again, it happens every 2 years. It's sort of, marketed as the Olympics of the art world because countries participate. they select one artist from their country or maybe a couple artists to sort of represent them. And there's like a, there's sort of a couple winners, right? Like a gold, silver, and whatnot. So that's how it's sort of classified as art. And the beauty of such events, and this is the same thing for art fairs, is that a lot of this discovery happens at these events. And
what are you passionately wanting to see? What are you excited about seeing, you personally, when you arrive, or is it just another industry affair for you?
Well, I mean, so the U.S. pavilion is being done by an artist named Simone Lee. She's an African-American artist on the East Coast. She produces amazing sculptures. I'm particularly excited to see that. It has gotten fantastic reviews. So I definitely include her up there. The other part that I'm seeing, that I'm particularly keen on seeing, is sort of the curated section. There's the pavilions that have the individual countries pavilions, and that's exciting. But then there's a one big exhibition, which is a lot of different artists that the selected curator of the Biennale, which is a woman, an Italian curator named Cecilia Alemani, who I used to work with at Frieze in New York. She has produced a very exciting sort of group exhibition that has a lot of sort of female artists that worked in the space of surrealism. So I'm particularly keen on seeing that.
Okay, Kamal, we have to stop it there. It's 11 o'clock, and we're very disciplined about people's times. I'm looking at the camera now. I want to thank you very, very much. This has been, I love these sessions myself because I learned something, which is, you can't always say. This has been very, very informative, and I appreciate all the learning you've given us today. I would advise everybody that our next connoisseurship event will be on October the 13th. We'll send out the obligatory promotional mailings, etc. But that will be with David Pearson. The subject is going to be food and wine, something that's very dear to the lives of all of us in the Bay Area. We've got David Pearson, who is the recently retired CEO of Opus One, and just a remarkable gentleman who has just broad knowledge on the subject. So we're looking forward to our in-depth conversation with him. And again, you will get a link. Eventbrite will send you out a link this afternoon to today's recording if you missed part of it, or if you want to go back and revisit again. Kamal, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to have you. I respect your knowledge, I respect your learning, and I appreciate your sharing it with us. And with that,
thank you for having me. Thank you for the questions. It was a great conversation.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned. It's been a pleasure to have you, and I guess it's back to work. Ciao.